This demonstration is going to step you through installing, configuring, running and finally testing a MySQL cluster database. Everything's going to be running on a single host, which is typical of how people get started, and then once you've got that working, you can then migrate some of the nodes onto other hosts to get a more robust solution. You can download the software from MySQL.com. On the MySQL Cluster download page, you'll see 3 links to quick start guides for Linux, Windows and Solaris. So I'd recommend that you download the right one for your operating system, and then you'll get a PDF file which includes all of the commands that you're going to need to type. So to speed things up, you can just cut and paste from that document. As an example, here's what the guide looks like for the Linux operating system. And as I say, it takes you right from downloading the software through to installing it, configuring it, running it, testing it, covering more or less the same ground as this demonstration. Okay, so to get started, we just need a command prompt on the machine that's actually going to run the cluster processes. And so that's what I have here. When we've downloaded the software from MySQLCluster.com, you'll have a tarball, so that's all of the files tarred up together, or if you're doing this on Windows, it would be a zip file. So we need to expand that, so we use the tar command on Linux, or we just unzip it if we're on Windows. The software's now been unzipped, so we just create a symbolic link just to save some typing, so we don't have to use that long directory name. One thing to note is that here I'm installing everything in the user's home directory, and the reason for that is just to keep it very simple for the first cluster. I now create a directory called MyCluster, and within there are a number of subdirectories. Again, you can copy these straight out from the PDF Quick Start Guide. So the MyCluster folder is going to contain all of the configuration information as well as any disk-based data associated with the database that we're creating. We need to create 2 configuration files in the configuration folder under MyCluster. The first of those is my.cnf, and this is for the MySQL server. You can copy the contents of this file directly from the quick install guide, but we will need to edit a couple of directory names. So just change the 2 paths for the data dir and the base dir, replacing user1 with whatever your username is. Once you've made the changes, just save the file. The second configuration file we need to create is called config.ini, and this applies to the whole cluster. Again, just copy the information from the Quick Start Guide and then edit the paths to match your home directory. And then just save the file. The final piece of setup before we start starting processes is to give MySQL Server the database information it needs. So for example, this sets up default usernames and passwords for the MySQL Server. We use the MySQL install DB script just as if we were any other MySQL installation. One thing to note is that this command isn't available on Windows, and so on Windows the guide will step you through how you copy the files from the installation folder into your database folder to get the same results. Next we're ready to start starting the processes, so just move to the MyCluster directory. From there you can start the first node, which is the management node. With MySQL Cluster, whenever we talk about nodes, what we're really meaning is processes. This may look a bit complicated, but you can copy this from the Quick Start Guide like everything else. And also note, the only reason we're giving the full path name to the binaries is because we're just installing things on the local directory rather than in their final locations. The management node has now come up, and you'll see from there that it has read the configuration information from that config.ini file that we generated. Now that the management node is running, we can start up the two data nodes. Before we go any further, we want to make sure that the two data nodes are up and running, and so we use the ndb mgm command and the show sub command within there to check that those nodes have been created and they've left the starting state, which they have done here. And the final process to start is the MySQL server. Again, we use the ndb mgm command just to check that the MySQL server is up and running and that it's connected to the cluster. And we can see the node has now been added under the MySQLD section. To test the cluster, we just use the regular MySQL client to connect to the MySQL server using the port number that we configured in the my.cnf file. Just create a test database and start using that database. When creating the table, the important thing is to include the engine equals ndb annotation at the end, and that just tells the MySQL server to use the MySQL cluster or the ndb storage engine for this table. To make sure that everything's working as intended, just insert some data into that table. Then we read the data back out again. You may notice that the rows are displayed in an odd order. That's very typical for MySQL cluster. If you care about the ordering of them, then obviously just you can include that in the SQL command when you do the select. Finally, we'll quit out of the MySQL command prompt and start shutting down the cluster. Just like any other MySQL server, we can shut that down using the MySQL admin command. Then to stop the rest of the cluster, we issue the shutdown command using the ndb mgm tool, and this will stop the two data nodes and then the management node. The database has now been shut down, so you can either power down the machine, or if you want to, you can restart the MySQL cluster processes.